Okay, the short version is I'm a recovering traumatized child. Would anybody else in here like to join me? So all of my experience and everything I'm going to share tonight is basically from my personal experience. You notice I do not have a PhD after my name. I only have a master's degree. And I decided to do that intentionally because I felt I could do greater service, not studying the research, but actually kind of down in the nitty-gritty underground of the work itself. So tonight I'm going to talk about trauma as a catalyst for transformation. I don't need to go into defining what we mean by trauma. I think Alyssa did a beautiful job of this before me, and the difference between PTSD and complex PTSD. But tonight, I'm specifically going to focus on complex PTSD. So that is the traumatic event of growing up in an environment as a child with non-nurturing parents or abusive parents. We want to look at this event in a little bit more positive light tonight. So it's going to be more about how we can actually use the trauma as a catalyst to transform our life, and specifically how we use psychedelics for discovering and celebrating our true self. So my mission has been, my whole life, to empower individuals to live fully in their authentic self. That's a big word, authentic self. What do we mean by that? We'll take a little bit of a look at that. We're going to talk we're going to talk some about my story and some of the clients that I work with. So we have some real concrete examples. We're going to look at what is CPTSD, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time with that because Alyssa did a beautiful job. But really more of what is the self? So it's like if we're functioning from the self, what does that mean? I mean, what does it mean to be a self that's been traumatized that's no longer? What does that actually mean? And the place of psychedelics in that healing path. I want to look at the actual healing path. So we're not going to talk so much about the research that's been done because a lot of people have already done that before me. But I do want to talk about getting down in the nitty-gritty healing journey and look at the stages of that and some of the contraindications for using psychedelics along the path if you are a child of childhood developmental trauma. So this is a quote from a client of mine who did his first MDMA journey, and he came back and he told me, something larger than my life, my soul is down on its knees, washing my feet with admiration, saluting my journey. My soul is washing my feet as an expression of honoring the courage it takes to be human, to be born and to forget that oneness and then to struggle back toward it. So my inquiry my whole life has been, what if trauma was the soul's chosen path to liberate ourselves from the imprisonment of the ego's perceived powerlessness, emptiness, and victimization? Now, what if there was actually a higher purpose to trauma? So my journey started at age 11 with a 20-year eating disorder. During that time, I was completely in denial, but I did have my moments of exploring LSD during this time. So I had many experiences along the way of cosmic openings and spiritual awakenings. However, I couldn't do much with those experiences because I assumed that they were the drug. So what happened was in my 20s, about my mid-20s, when I was coming back from a Rolfing session, riding the subway in New York City down to the loft that I lived, which was quite rat-infested, but that was all I could do at that point in my life. I was on the subway and I was lifted up into a state of bliss, love, And even though I had had no religious training, which I'm very grateful for today, I knew somehow or some way or another that this was a God experience. So because that experience was not drug-induced, that was my way of making the connection in my brain that told me that it was actually possible to live my life that way. Before I couldn't do it because I ascribed it to the LSD. So it was from that moment on that I became committed to healing the dysfunctional life I was in and living a life of love. So I spent the next 20 years, decades, probably more than that, actually working on that healing, which we now call integration. I didn't know at the time that's what I was doing. I was in an integration process, integrating that experience and all the LSD experiences I had and trying to figure out how do I become whole when I'm so traumatized. I'm so dysfunctional, because my dysfunctional was social anxiety, depression, despair, dread, isolation, binging and purging 4 or 5 times a day, eating out of garbage pails. That's what I was doing. And so when I had this experience, that was truly opening. But it was that commitment that had me move forward, and I began looking for all sorts of psychospiritual trainings. I found a mystical training that I was in for 15 years. I became a psychotherapist. I studied somatic work, cognitive work, expressive arts work, so somatic work and transpersonal work. And along the way, within 3 or 4 years, I was able to be rid of the eating disorder behavior, but lo and behold, I didn't realize that there was still that depression and that despair and that dread underneath. That's what took me decades, step by step, to get through. So in my 50s or my 60s, I don't remember. And my husband left. I mean, we got a divorce and my children left home. That was my big chance. So I ran down to the Amazon and I engaged in the ayahuasca ceremonies down there. I had a wiped clean slate, actually erased all of my history. So I came back to Portland and for the next 2 years trying to figure out who I am living in this house here and what do I do now? I didn't know. I went to Mexico, did an ibogaine journey. At that point, a birth trauma that I didn't even know I had was healed. I came back, and as you know, with ibogaine, within the 6 months or so period that we have for that neuroplasticity, I religiously did what Spirit Iboga told me, that the purpose of my life was to enjoy my life. That was a big aha. I had always been looking for something else. And so I religiously took out everything that did not bring me joy, including an old relationship, and I put in place only those things that brought me joy to the best of my ability. It was during that time that I grabbed a colleague and I said, hey, let's try this MDMA thing. And she said, okay. So we did, I did. And we did a lot of trading with each other. But it was that first MDMA experience that changed my life, again, similar to an event that happened on the subway decades earlier. It was that experience that I was taken into a place within myself of knowing who I was for the first time in my life. So up until that point, I had felt out of place and like I didn't belong on this planet. I don't know if anybody else here ever feels that way. I didn't think I was alone in that. But I walked into that experience alienated, and I walked out of that experiencing having found myself. So it was that time that I made the commitment that I was going to use all of my skills and everything I had learned and all of my years of training and life experience for the purpose of helping other people who have developmental trauma heal and find the truth of who they are. So this is what I wrote, although I just said it, because I don't have to read it again. I will just skip it. Okay, what I did realize, okay, and this was a very, very important piece to me, that I'm not sure that today has been covered up to this point, so I really want to emphasize it. We're getting the sense that it doesn't take a lifetime to heal anymore. That's my firm belief. It doesn't take as long as it took me to become functional, because we have the assistance of these amazing medicines. We can speed up the journey. But I do believe that there are 3 things that need to be in place in order for that to happen. 1, we have to have a conceptual framework. So think about it like this. I'm sitting on the I'm a kid and I'm playing with LSD, and all of a sudden I'm in cosmic space. What conceptual framework do I have? I don't have one. All I have is that this is a drug experience. That was all I had to work with. So it couldn't really stick. But when I had the experience that showed me that I was God in the subway in New York City, it began to ring true. So the conceptual framework is something we're going to go in further with today. We have to use psychedelics intelligently, which people have been sharing. And we have to have a skillful way of working with ourselves. So here's my psychedelic disclosure. I'm not advocating the use of anything deemed illegal. But we're all desperate for modalities that work. And then, as you've seen, the research can't be denied. So individuals are choosing this, you're choosing this, I'm choosing this, so we better be informed. Here's my theory or my conceptual framework, that the essence of who we are is never and has never been traumatized. And the invitation of trauma is to step fully into our highest, most beloved state of existence, our true life, if we use it that way. And that psychedelic medicine is one of the best tools I know to help us do that. So, CPTSD, think about this as post-traumatic stress disorder. As Alyssa alluded to, we have the fight-flight response in the body. Fight and flight is to fight off the threatening that's coming at us. Flight is to run away. It takes an enormous amount of energy in the body to do that. When we cannot fight and we cannot flight, it's held in the body and becomes what we call PTSD symptoms, or high-level anxiety. And when the body can't handle it, when we can't handle that somatically, the nervous system will shut down, and we now know that's more what we're talking about when we're talking about depression. So what I want to say here is that CPTSD in adults is resulting not only in those states of anxiety and depression, but also in addiction, problems with relationships, health, and financial security. But one thing we don't talk about very much is that, and I love this phrase from Wikipedia, it distorts a person's core identity. So we're going to talk about the ego, because the ego is what we're talking about now as the defended self, or what we use to defend ourselves from the pain that we feel in order to function in our culture, in order to be a functioning human being. So if we look at this chart, oh, it's behind me. All right, I thought it was in front of me. I don't know where the little thingy is. Is this the thingy? Yeah, okay. So here's this authentic self I'm talking about. And that's really simple. I mean, it's really, if you look at a child, right? A child is just free-flowing, cries when she needs something, asks for something. As we get older, we learn how to use our words. But it's pretty simple. It's just the free child, or the free adult. And when that is abused or neglected, what we experience instead is in the center here, which is called pain. So in IFS, it's called the wounded or the exiled self. These wounded parts of us, when we're abandoned, if we don't have our feelings and our needs, we feel empty, like we don't matter and we don't exist. And we walk around with that inside of us, but that's too horrible to feel. So what we do is we create a false self on the outside, and that false self looks to others to fill the space, looks to money to fill the space, success to fill the space, addiction, substances to fill the space. But inside of that, so on this outer circle, we have the so-called protectors that defend us. For example, people pleasing. If I don't want to feel the pain of somebody leaving me again, I'm going to reduce my capacity to know what it is I need and feel in order to keep that person with me, right? So that they don't leave. So we feel empty and we keep repeating that pattern. I'm not going to go into all of it because we don't have time, but just know that there's, when we've been invaded or abused, there's a different kind of defense, like a wall that we put up, and we walk through life with this wall to protect us, but what we don't realize is that we're also walling off our authentic feelings inside. So what do we do with that? Well, it's simple. Isn't it simple? All we have to do is get from the outer circle to the inner circle. I love it because I love making things so simple. So we're going to talk about how we do that. So when I was binging and purging, and my goal was to stop binging and purging, I was on the outer addiction circle. I was on the circle of addiction on the outside. And I knew that I knew inside of me that my authentic self was not addicted to food, was not a compulsive eater. What I had to do was walk through the pain. So typically what we do is we get attached to a way of being, whether it's an addiction or a people-pleasing or whatever it might be for us. If we try to give it up, we're thrown into the pain. And then typically what we do is we get back out on the outer circle again to feel the relief of that pain. Many of us protect ourselves from the inner child or the wounding of the child by going up into our head, which is on this chart, the mentalizer. And we live our life as if we're living our life. We get hung up on too much thinking, too much planning, too much futurizing, and fixing. We can live our whole life from there and die and not realize that we haven't lived. So what I want to basically leave you with in terms of this is that when the self is invalidated as a child, our authentic feelings, needs, and thoughts about ourselves disappear. And in their place, we have to put something else in place to get us through our life. Now, I'm sorry, but my MDMA experience, and I did pretty well up to that point, was in my 60s. I did pretty well without a self. Here's some of the stuff that doesn't happen when we've been abused or neglected. We don't feel safe in the world. We don't feel like it's safe to have needs. It's not safe to exist. It's not safe to act on our needs and ask for what we want. It's not safe to ask for support and allow ourselves to be supported. It's not safe to say no to things we don't want, and it's not safe to trust our inner guidance. Instead, we're left with an inability to feel and need, a diminishing sense of ourself, like I don't matter, my needs don't matter, an inability to have a voice, to be seen and heard. We don't have self-soothing skills. We have pent-up rage and terror stored in our nervous system. We become hyper-vigilant so that nobody will hurt us again. We lack trust in our own perceptions. We create avoidance patterns, decreased connections with others, lack of community and intimate relationships. We have money issues. Why? Because we don't have the self-confidence, or we're not in touch with what it is we really want to do. So we end up doing something our mother or father wants us to do, and then we hate it. So how we get from that outer circle to that inner circle? We have to have a conceptual framework of the self. This is the hard part, but this is what psychedelics can give us if we're holding the framework, the conceptual framework. So if we step into a journey and we have a sense for the first time of what it feels like to be me. If we have the framework for that, we can capture that moment and use it. If we don't have the framework, it will pass us by. So psychedelics give us the experience of ourself, as do spiritual practices, such as breathing and being present, that kind of thing, as well as certain states that if we're working with somebody who can reflect that back to us, like when I feel gratitude or I feel excited, or can at least help us look for those things in our life, then we can find them and use them. And we can say, this is me. I feel gratitude, I feel blessed. But we have to have the framework. We have to know what's not us. We have to have somebody across from us helping us identify those defended false self patterns, and we have to be able to identify them ourselves. So when they happen, we can tell ourselves, oh, that's not me. Wait a minute, I remember who I was. I have to get back there. Okay, and then we have to have skills for embodying that self, that true self, gracefully, and we have to have experiences. That's what I'm talking about, of living into our authentic presence. So how do we use psychedelics along these lines? Using them intelligently. Intelligently. So they're not the way, obviously, but they help us open to the way. And they will bring us and can help us bring us to our truth faster than any other process I know of. And as a matter of fact, I don't know anything that is as powerful as psychedelic work to counter the confusion, fear, false beliefs and perceptions, the despair, hopelessness, and powerlessness, of our ego minds. And unless you're on a drug right now, you are listening to me through your filter. You are listening to me through your ego mind. And it is telling you a bunch of stuff that I would not believe. But psychedelics don't do the work for us. Shucks. They're not another happy pill or a magic fix. So here's what they can do. Here's how they give us this sense of new self. They can give it to us through cosmic experiences. They can show us lessons hidden within the trauma that we've had in the past. They can give us a feeling sense of ourself and understanding of what it means to be in the self versus the ego. They can help us dissolve those ego defenses that I'm talking about right now, we're all in listening to, and our body armor. And they give us an experience of ourself as an embodied soul. Wow, it's all 15 minutes, so I guess I'm going to go a little bit into, we're going to skip the DMN because it's already been covered. Here is some, so basically psychedelics, here's the way we can use them effectively. They do not fix the ego. They take us beyond the ego. They dissolve or soften our ego. They help us to alter survival beliefs. They provide inner resources for nurturance, protection, and safety that maybe we never got as a child. And they can surprise us with unexpected results and powerful healings that we weren't expecting. I actually want to go through some of these with examples from clients I have worked with. And I am working with clients as an integration therapist. So Dina is a creative, talented, and successful performance artist. This is an example of not using the psychedelic to create a better ego. So a talented and successful performance artist who felt blocked in her work. Her goal was to use psychedelic therapy to increase her creative potential and output. Sounds reasonable, right? She hoped to dissolve her saboteur. And I said, great, go for it. Instead, she became aware of using her work as a defensive strategy to protect against underlying feelings of unworthiness due to feeling invisible and unappreciated as a child. She came out of that experience with a clear understanding that her primary goal was not her work after all, but her need to relax and find a sense of worthiness from within. Okay, here's an example of someone who actually worked with the medicine and went beyond the ego into other dimensions. Very interesting example. So Kay is, of course, a miracle student with severe childhood abuse. She felt disconnected and unhappy in her life and wanted greater peace and love. She wanted to live the principles of the course. She already had the framework, right? She already had the conceptual framework, but she felt blocked. So when she came back and told me about her experience, she actually had what she described as a third eye opening and saw that actually this was her first incarnation on this earth, and she solidified her relationship with Jesus, and she solidly stepped into herself as a light worker. At first she had some trouble integrating it, but what I found most interesting is that she never really had to go back and work with the sexual abuse. It was a non-issue. We're going to skip that. Let's see, let's help us alter survival beliefs. So this is Tony, used with permission. So he told me that he went into his experience, again, childhood sexual abuse, childhood abuse, and he could not get his brain to relax. So he was like, it was like a ball bouncing off the wall. And he spent the first hour or two actually pleading with his brain for a long time, please settle down, okay? Ultimately, what happened was he was able to find the belief that said he was broken. He was able to shift that belief and actually come out of that experience knowing that he was lovable, that he was never broken. Okay. So another thing that it can do is dissolve or soften our ego defenses, and especially through the body when we're carrying ego defenses as body armor in the body. So this is Michael's story. Prior to psychedelic work, I would have a sense of myself being curled up in a fetal position trying to hide. In the 10 years of work before that, I had only progressed in the slightest of increments. That's when I decided I wouldn't have enough time in my life to heal. So when I heard about psychedelic psychotherapy, I decided to try it. Psychedelics enabled me to melt an iron defense that was keeping me feeling distant, shielded, and away from other people. Over several months, the wall came down. The feedback I got from other people was that I was less defended and more there, and he was able to then enter into more authentic relationships with others. And I think this is a very, very important one. This is my client, Jen. She told me I had always functioned from a place of fear. I don't ever remember feeling safe. My mother had been narcissistic and worked from the first month after my birth. I never bonded with her and never felt any form of loving nurturance from her. So when we think about that, growing up in a household without love, right, without having the experience of having bonded with somebody else, you think this is going to be impossible. How do you give somebody that experience? So during the journey with my boyfriend, the mushrooms enabled me to experience a profound sense of safety in my body, one that I had never felt before. Afterwards, I realized that I was being given an experience of what it means to bond with another human being. That, to me, is worth everything. And here are a couple of surprises. So here are some of the surprises that come out of it. Before the experience, life was gray, and I felt tortured by an inner state of unrest, stress, and general malaise. The journey brought me to an experience of deep peace and pleasure that I obviously didn't experience in my life. And since that day, I've continued to experience the pleasure of life in a new, deeper, relaxed way. I can actually say that I feel a delight in being alive. And then as a bonus, this is what she did not go into, there was no intention, not even thinking about it. When I was 20, I was raped. and until the journey have been frightened of sex. I was surprised to discover that my fear of sex has completely gone away. So I know we're short for time, but Dave's story, an active alcoholic who I'd been working with for a while, and together we decided, or he thought that psychedelic psychotherapy, and I approved, would help him. And so he did along the MAPS model, 3 months, spaced about a month apart with us doing sessions in between. By the end, his alcoholism was gone. So here's what I say, be adequately prepared. Integration starts with preparation. I do all integration before the journey. And there's 4 things that I'm always looking at out for my clients. I'm looking at for spiritual, cognitive, emotional, and somatic. So we have to be working on all those 4 levels. How do I prepare clients? Psychoeducation. A lot of what we've just done tonight. And specifically trying to get across this idea that your essence is not the one that's suffering, that you are not your suffering. Then I begin to teach tools. How can you recognize when you're in the truth of who you are versus when you're not? There may need to be communication skills. If one side of a couple decides that they want to do psychedelic therapy and the other side of the couple is hostile, whoops. And I'm not so sure that's a good setting. Setting. So I will look for those things. What do we need to do there to get you on board so that when you come out of that journey, your spouse is on board with you or your partner is on board with you. I will teach people how to work with the fight-flight response in their body so that they know that that is what happens. Because if you go into a journey and all of a sudden that medicine brings up freeze in your body, or you start shaking uncontrollably, you want to know how to deal with that. You want to know that that's okay, that the body is actually unwinding. We want to look at the beliefs. What are my clients' beliefs? So how are they going to function in the world after this journey without that belief? I mean, that's a tricky one. Okay, so practical preparation. Some support network. Do you have a strong enough network of people who are supportive of your experience and who you might be when you come out? What about your significant other, as we just discussed? What setting are you going home to? Is it a hostile setting? Is it a cluttered setting? Is it a setting that's going to pull you back to the person you were? You want to start making those changes before the journey, not afterwards. That's not the time. Are you expecting a magic fix? Forget it. So have you done your work? I start preparing clients to do their work with a proper preparation and integration plan. Psychological preparation, we've been talking about safety. One piece of safety is there are 2 forms of safety, internal and external resources. So do I have people in my life that feel safe? Can I access safety and a felt sense of safety in the body? You want to understand those defenses, those things on the outer circle, so that you know that, wow, if they start to dissolve, you'll know that you're okay, that was just the defenses that went away. And a lot of those defenses are the thinking mind. So a lot of clients, will set the intention to go into a journey for one thing because their ego thinking mind, their filter, has figured it all out. And they come out, whoa, that's not what happened. No. Okay. Can you deal with intensity of feelings? Like, do you easily get overwhelmed, angry, fearful, full of grief? Because the way that you've used to contain those feelings may not be as active. So I want to prepare my clients and make sure that they know that they can handle some of the feelings that might come up afterwards. Needs. Do you know how to ask for your needs to be met? That's part of the training. Do you know how to say no? Do you know how to say no to things that you do not want in your life? Do you have a spiritual practice? Presence, breathing, and embodiment skills. Can you get grounded in your body? Does that feel comfortable? More preparation. I'm gonna leave this because I really want to get to the stages of healing. I don't want to leave this out. So those 4 stages of I don't know that I don't know, I know that I don't know that I know myself, and I know that I know myself. Whew, okay. So when we're in I don't know that I don't know myself, like if you're in addiction and you're playing with drugs and you have recreational use, that's pretty much what that is. At that point, a guide or a therapist doesn't have much to do. When you start going into, like I did with the subway in New York City, into that place of awakening, and you begin to realize, well, there's another part of me that I never knew existed, then at that time, the use of psychedelics becomes the thing that can actually utilize to continue to open the door, to continue to explore, and amplify that awakening experience. And your guide or your therapist at that point wants to validate your experiences all along the way. Then when you go into I don't know that I know, or I don't know that I know myself, that's the stage when we enter into I've got to find my teachers. I've got to find my gurus. I've got to find the people out there that know something that I don't know. And so that's the intentional use of psychedelics, so that they are then used to help train us to learn what it is about ourselves that we haven't yet got in touch with. And the guide at that point's job is to teach and to mirror the truth, and to help the client separate what's not true from what's true. And finally, we enter into the stage, oh, I know that I know myself. That's when there's a strong sense of inner guidance and self-responsibility. And the purpose of psychedelics at that point is to heighten spiritual awareness, and the purpose of the guide is to stand back and allow, encourage, and affirm. If this happens over time, we cannot skip steps. You can not get from step 1 to step 4. I'm sorry if I'm blowing anybody's hopes. Time reveals the gifts, the lessons hidden within our pain. We have many self-initiations along the way. As new aspects of self are revealed, psychedelics will enhance where you already are and help you take the next step. They will not help you skip steps. Okay, words of caution for those of you here who were lucky enough to have the kinds of parents that maybe you didn't want. Be careful of holding an idealized image of your ego, what your ego thinks it wants, in order to be accepted and feel worthy. Okay, as my client, Dina, as I expressed. Be aware of the magic fix. It's not going to happen. Again, the history of psychosis, bipolar schizophrenia. Lack of skills. If you do not have skills to self-regulate, to regulate your emotions, to communicate well, safety, to get yourself to safety, know yourself, discerning your boundaries, don't expect psychedelics are going to give you that. And it could be a little scary if you don't have those skills. It could kind of blow you beyond your capacity. A limited capacity to appreciate undefended reality. If all we know and we walk around is our limited ego, encapsulated self, what happens when we don't? And can we even harness that and know how to use it in our life in a very real way? If you're easily flooded by feelings, intense feelings, you want to be sure you know how to take care of that, and you want to work with that beforehand. If you have any minimization or denial of past trauma, be aware that that could open that up, and what could be spewing out of you is rage and terror. Again, a lack of support system, inability to embrace change. So this is an interesting one. So I have worked with people who go in and they describe an amazing experience, and they come out, and then a few weeks later or a month or two later, everything's the same. There's like almost like that whole thing closes up. It's too scary. I don't know how to function in the world in this new way with myself. Okay, and of course, becoming addicted to the high, using it just as we would alcohol or drugs or anything else. There's a bunch of questions that I find useful, but I don't think I'm going to go into it right now. And this is a summary. So The psychedelics can help us rewire neural pathways, heal old wounds, shift perceptions, expand self-identity, interrupt old patterns, live with more joy, feel safe, show us more directions, find new meaning, forgive, find truth, dissolve body armor, intensify feelings, and dissolve fear. But they will not install new behavior. They will not teach us new skills, living skills. They do not give us stronger boundaries. They do not improve communication. They do not help us develop or regulate our emotions. And they do not eradicate the inner critic. They may temporarily. Should qualify that. Okay, so your true self is waiting for you. You have to do the work. Expect the unexpected. Stay open. Believe in the impossible. And never give up. I drew this drawing, and I wanted to share it for all you perfectionists out there. I'm being silly, and I'm still loved. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jane. Do we have any questions out here? Yes.
Oh, there's a bottle of water.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I had a question about the kind of the work done beforehand that you were discussing, and I was wondering about, I know some folks that have struggled with like really treatment resistant depression for long periods of time, and they're not really in a place to do a lot of the work that you're discussing. They don't have some of the skills that you're discussing. That
I'm sorry,
So if there's someone who doesn't have quite all of the skills that you're discussing that would be ideal for them to have an experience, is there ever a situation where there's more of emergency intervention or something for someone who's really struggling and probably can't make those steps on their own without the medicine? Thank you.
It's a really good question. I don't know. Anybody likes to answer that question in here? I mean, because that's it's a risk, right? And at the same time, it's tragic that there's no other way. So I think if you put all those other things in place that I mentioned, at least some of them, like the safety factors, and make sure that whatever they can do is done, and they have a therapist or somebody that can be with them and keep them safe and hold their hand through the process, I think that it might be possible, yeah.
Consent is always very valuable and important and necessary in these things. Jane, question over here.
In the environment that I'm in right now, there's a lot of people using psychedelics in a very, I guess you'd say, like non-intelligent way. Is there anything you can recommend that I could maybe invite them or influence them to either not use them or use them in a more intelligent, respectful manner?
Wow, short of like going to this lecture? Look, I did that for a decade. Nobody would have told me, could have told me to stop it. I really do think that what I said about it's a process and that we can't skip steps, and that part of the steps is going through the messes and the screw-ups and finding out what doesn't work. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing, is that we each have to allow ourselves to fumble, to fail, to mess up, because that's how we learn. And I know I have clients that have that strong perfectionistic bent, and they're scared to do anything because they want to do it right. And I think that's one of the hardest things to crack. So we have to let ourselves and others mess up.
Thank you. We have time for one last question.
I'm wondering if you have ever experienced difficulties with grounding a client after an intense session, or if you have heard of such a thing.
With what? Say it again.
Grounding, like bringing them back.
Oh.
And maybe in the few days that followed. And yeah.
Not as much as you think, but I think it's because of the preparation work that I do. As I said, the integration starts with preparation. I do all of my work before. So there's not as much. It's really takes a lot of the stress off of later. Because already the concept is there, the knowing how to ground into the body is there, and then it's just sort of like a reminder.
Another round of applause for Jane Latimer.
Great job.